Have you ever fantasized or dreamt about what it'd be like to fly across the world, to leave behind your normal life and just be someone else? So have I. On July 11th, 2020, I wrote, "My ultimate goal is to be able to live and work remotely, to have the freedom and flexibility to live in and experience all the amazing cultures and beauty life has to offer." Nearly 2.5 years later, a few journals later, my dream came true. Well, at least for the last 2 weeks, I was solo traveling across the world in Bali. When people hear solo travel, Bali, they're probably thinking beach clubs, margaritas, or some picturesque photos for Instagram, whether it's on a swing overlooking a rice field or standing on top of a mountain. But that's not why I went. Instead, I flew across the world to answer one question. Are you designing a life you actually like living in? There's this concept that's been around for some time, but I don't believe it's discussed or even modeled enough on social media, particularly among people in their early 20s. Lifestyle design. As it sounds, lifestyle design is an approach to intentionally crafting a lifestyle that aligns with who you authentically are at your core, all of your unique interests, values, and priorities. Many of us, myself included, have spent our lives believing and following these standard life scripts without so much as a second thought. Because after all, if no one else is questioning them, then why should we? It's the life script that sounds way too familiar, right? One that revolves around getting a college degree just so you can endure the standard 40-year career, and as author Tim Ferriss puts it, resignation to 9-to-5 drudgery in exchange for sometimes relaxing weekends and the occasional keep it short or get fired vacation. With this way of thinking and living, we develop these limiting beliefs that create this sort of self-imposed gap between those of us who get to live those unrealistic lives that many of us can only dream of, and the rest of us who have to settle for the realistic, good enough lives. And while the gap between realistic and unrealistic can seem like this impossible leap, lifestyle design is the way to bridge that gap. So ask yourself, am I living a life I actually like living in? If you had asked me this question a year ago, I genuinely don't know how I would have responded. I would have been probably at a loss for words. Maybe after a few moments, I would have given you this half-hearted, yeah, for sure, trying to convince myself more than I was trying to convince you. But in reality, the answer would have been no. I mean, I was living a life in which over 70% of my waking hours, I was switched on for work. Just fast forwarding, going through the motions of my day, just to make it to the weekend, make it to that short-lived or get fired vacation. I evidently went through my own sort of grow your hair out, travel the world sort of existential life crisis that left me asking what truly living means to me. And when I realized that, yeah, I wasn't living to that definition, then the question became, how do I actually go and do it? As I was questioning these standard life scripts, having these sort of questions and conversations with myself, I honestly felt pretty alone. There wasn't really anyone else to bounce ideas off of. And it wasn't until I read the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss did I find the words, the guidance, the how to actually go about creating and living this life of my dreams. And it all starts by treating your life and all that you do as these sort of experiments. Conducting experiments is a low-cost, max-reward way to effectively design and live the life of your dreams. Because when you view yourself and all that you do from the lens of an experiment, you give yourself the freedom and permission to try different things out, to try different lives out without making any sort of irreversible commitments, which is an entirely necessary component because as human beings, we are like psychologically wired to avoid change and uncertainty. At the very least, you scratch an itch, gain a fond memory, or you gain the necessary experience and confidence to slowly bridge the gap between the life you're actually living and the life you want to live. The last 9 months or so, I've ran my own series of mini experiments that have all sort of led and built into this most recent experiment I ran in Bali. The first mini experiment I ran was this 4-day weekend I had honestly a couple weeks before I quit my job, in which I basically got to experiment with the creator lifestyle and just see if I like the taste. And I mean, it's safe to say that I did. From there, I had this 2-month gap between when I quit my first day job and when I started my second one. And for that first month, I was really experimenting with being a part-time creator as I balanced recruiting, which honestly in itself can be a full-time job, as well as being a creator on the side. And it was this 1-month experiment of being a part-time creator that really gave me the experience and confidence to pursue it a step further. And for the past, 8 months or so, that's exactly what I've been doing. The second half of that 2-month gap, after I had accepted my full-time job offer, I was essentially experimenting with being a full-time creator, but honestly, at the time, I didn't have the proper mindset or systems in place to effectively do it. So part of my reasoning for this experiment the past 2 weeks was to continue getting that experience and confidence. But on top of all of this, the primary reason I ran this experiment and did it in Bali of all places was to really try out that dream lifestyle I wrote about 2.5 years ago, to essentially be a digital nomad. The appeal and beauty of being a digital nomad is that you can obviously work from anywhere in the world as long as you've got a laptop and some decent Wi-Fi. But I chose Bali in particular because it allowed me to experiment with some other areas that I've been curious about as well. As much as I believe the pace you live at is largely driven by you and your own actions, the environment you live in does play a role, which, as I've talked about before, that's why I moved out of Manhattan over to Brooklyn. But at the same time, I don't know if it's just being in your early 20s or living in close proximity to a city like New York, but there's always this sort of underlying sort of hustle or sense of urgency that I can't really say I'm a huge fan of. So that's part of why I chose to go to Bali. I wanted to remove myself as far as possible from the westernized cities and hustle culture that comes with them, and just sort of see for myself if I could, or much less enjoy, living that slower pace of life, particularly given who and where I am in life right now. Living in New York City and just generally speaking, I've had a harder time finding a community of like-minded people who truly understand the person I'm aspiring to be, the life I aspire to live, and it's been hard at times, which is why I chose Bali of all places. For better or worse, on social media, you've seen that there's this already sort of existing community of digital nomads and expats out there that I hope would give me that sort of community that I've been looking for. Now that it's the day after getting back from Bali and this 2-week experiment I just ran, and I'm not nearly as jet lagged, I thought I'd share my results, if you want to call it, on the different areas I just mentioned from this experiment. Just being able to do work that you genuinely care about while also being able to experience the world through different cultures and people is hard to fully capture in words. I feel like it's something that you just have to experience for yourself. Just being able to really take each day and do what energizes you, to be able to go to bed at night excited for the next day because you know that you get to do it all over again. And that only really comes from having control of your time. When you have control of your time, you can obviously dictate the pace of your life, the sort of adventures that you have day in and day out. And for me, just having nowhere to be is such a liberating feeling, to be able to take the longer route, to be able to stop, stare, and think, to be able to have a heartfelt conversation with a stranger. I mean, those are the little things that bring me so much joy and make life beautiful. And I sort of realized that that's what's more important to me. It doesn't matter where I am in the world, whether it's in New York or whether it's in Bali, London, wherever, but just being able to take life at my own pace, which again only comes from having that autonomy over your time. Whether in cafes, gyms, or even just wandering the streets, I felt this camaraderie and understanding that I haven't experienced in New York City. The people out in Bali aren't there to play the corporate rat race or climb the ladder to chase material things, but instead to have the freedom to be able to dictate the pace and the direction of their lives. And just being able to see and be around these people, this community, was all the proof I needed to say, hey, it is possible to create, to design, to live the life of your dreams. So while this mini experiment of mine of being a digital nomad living in Bali has come to an end, I'm genuinely more inspired and empowered than ever to turn this life I've been dreaming about the last 2.5 years into reality, to design and live a life I don't want or need to fly across the world to leave behind, to be someone else.